Ready.
Dun,
Guilty
Guilty balls.
balls. Yeah.
My kiddos, this week we're talking about how you always finish after me.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't have the heart to tell them, like, it's kind of just you always finish after me, right? Like, I always take care of
Yeah,
myself
I
first.
try not to finish too early.
hmm I don't know if they understood, but
That's fine. Yeah, you
I'm
do.
like, it's like a thing. It's like a thing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, it's just the way it is.
That one I tried to speed up a little bit, so we'll have to see how that's. Well, I mean,
Nice,
because
nice.
you're doing the recording, and
hmm
so I'm a slight delay, so I have to try to plan ahead.
Oh, nice, nice. Well, that's what they said. They're like, probably the delay or probably all this other stuff. And I've noticed lately on film, I'm looking a little grayer. I don't think I'm this gray in person.
I think that we might have to have a meeting, a sit down meeting for you. There'll be all your family there in the mirror.
Do we call those interventions?
That would be an intervention, I think.
You guys just are seeing the wrong thing. That's what I think. You're
Yeah,
seeing the wrong thing.
quite possibly. That's
Um,
true.
anyway, listeners, welcome back to another episode of the Kilted
Yes.
Balls.
Enough with our
Woo!
bantering.
I know. I had a full weekend off, which is nice. It was
Awesome.
beautiful. It was relaxing. Had kiddos home. It was nice. It was nice. It's nice to
That's
have a weekend
awesome.
like that.
That's
It was
super
weird.
awesome.
Like I felt weird, like having time.
You're like, what's going on?
I'm like, this is so odd. Like I felt like a few times I was like, I think I should be doing stuff. This doesn't feel right. But
Mm-hmm.
I got over it. I got over it. And so it felt good.
Yeah, we had a crazy weekend here, and so yeah, made it through.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it has been, I was gonna say it's been the year for death, but that was supposed to be last year. But yeah,
Yeah.
that makes the weekends not as fun
Mm-hmm.
when people schedule things like funerals and wakes over the weekend, which honestly, when you this one was scheduled, I was like, that's weird. Normally they're during the week.
Mm-hmm.
So how was this one scheduled not during the week? Was like,
I did not have anything to do with the scheduling, so I'm not sure. I always thought funerals were on the weekends, honestly, though.
no, I don't think they ever
Usually
are.
they're during the week.
Yeah,
Really?
I think I went to, how many did I go to last year? 5 or 10? And I don't
Mm-hmm.
think any of them were on the weekend. None.
Okay. Well, then I would say possibly that would be when the most people could make it. So it was scheduled like that. So the loved ones who were going to be there anyways were able to still be there.
They wouldn't just
That
take
makes,
time off work and stuff.
well, I think so, but not everybody is in a position where just taking a day off is fine. Some people have jobs where they can't just take a day off, or if you take a day off, you're not getting paid that day,
Yeah, for sure.
things like that. So yeah, it was interesting. I was slightly concerned that there would be like a little bit of chaos. Yeah, I said something to you and Jason. But
Yeah, and
yeah,
I didn't
everything went
understand that, but then in retrospect, like then I was like, oh, I think I get it, right? Like, because
hmm
mainly because of you were thinking it was going to be chaos because of the clientele.
hmm
Yeah, see, because I was like, oh, why is there chaos? Like, what kind of, and then
Yeah.
like later on, I was like, oh, I get it. I get it. Which makes it
Yeah.
even harder, right? Like it's harder to like do your zoning.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Um, and I mean, regular listeners might know this, they might not, but we usually don't talk about what we're going to talk about on the show. It's usually a surprise. I mean, we might cut like some basic things, but this one I was so excited about, and I didn't want to forget that
yeah.
I did mention something to you, and I don't know if we have other things to cover as well. I guess we can get to that, but
Wait,
I was
before you do
really
it, Saturday is the most popular day for funerals in America.
okay. And that's what it was, Saturday.
I Googled it up. So
hmm What about
sorry.
for Catholics instead of just America? So.
Catholics, it would probably not because like we don't even have like even weddings have to be done like I think it's before 2 o'clock on a Saturday.
Okay.
So if you're going to have it on a Saturday, you'd have to be like, it'd have to be early. And I mean, most funerals are normally early.
Yeah.
Oh, so this website says any day of the week, most are held in during the week in the morning or early afternoon.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe this isn't like a set thing,
Yeah.
right?
It seems like it would just be kind of so many days after. I don't
Well, that
know.
was actually what surprised me the most. I felt
Mhm.
like this one was way, way after.
Yeah.
And like recently, all of them have been within days.
Yeah.
So not always, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes there's like a cremation or whatever, and
And
they're
that's
just
what
like,
this
whatever.
situation was as well.
Yeah. And so then they can schedule whenever the heck they feel like it.
Hmm.
But it always feels like most of the time it's like boom, boom, which I personally like. Like, let's kind
Yeah.
of get that phase over with. So anyway,
Yeah.
yeah,
So we can
that
start
was some,
moving on.
yeah, right.
Hmm.
So the episode, you have an idea of what you wanted to talk about. I'm excited because you just sent me a text and I did not understand it. You were like, "Oh, I want to talk about this," and then after thinking about it more and more, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is a great subject."
Yes. So let me start off. So, any new listeners, any people who aren't as close with me, I am a firm believer in everything happens is supposed to happen. How do I know? How do I know I made a right choice or a wrong choice or whatever? Like if I had to do something again, then I made the wrong choice. And the next time I had to do it correctly. But
Okay,
the reason like and this is just my beliefs. Like if something happened, that means it was meant to happen. And yes, don't take away free will because you have the opportunity to make wrong choices and then make them again. But at the same time, Wayne Dyer puts it. He's like, not only are you the lead role of your movie, but you're also a spear holder in a greater, I forget the word he uses, but if that makes sense, like yes, you're in charge of your own story, but you're also a cog in the greater universe of what's going on. So
for
I mean,
sure.
I buy into that. So what came up, and obviously there was a death in the family, and I don't think we talked about it last week. I don't think I mentioned it at all, but I couldn't
Mm-mm,
remember. But
I don't think
anyways,
so.
I wanted to talk to you about what I would say parental guilt, meaning that as a parent, so here's two examples. I'm going to use myself and yourself.
I like
My
people using me.
my parents, I I would say like being raised by my mom and my stepdad. They
Hmm.
were awesome people, and we had the run of the muck. And the choices that I made were different from the choices they made, and I pursued my life differently. Like I chose to not smoke, I chose to not drink. So I was kind of being a rebellious to what was around me all the time, and not purposely. Those weren't things that I wanted to do besides experimenting when I was much younger than people should experiment. Um, so so
Much younger.
there's that, and I like to think I turned out fine. I wasn't using those things as excuses because people will be like, "Oh, I have to smoke because my parents smoked," or "I'm an alcoholic because my parents were alcoholics," or
Sure.
whatever.
Yes.
So I chose not to do that. Now, when I look at you, we've talked about how awesome your family is. You were raised a little bit more strict, being I would say just because you were raised Catholic, so you had some guidelines,
Yes.
as
Hmm.
far as that's concerned. Now you look at someone like your mom, who has, I would say, all your brothers and sisters, and including yourself, are successful people, very good members of society,
Sure.
that others would look up to, you know, so however, whether it's their peers that would want to be like them or just the people that they're around. Whereas the
Yep.
household that I
Yep.
grew up in, there was three of us. I would like to think that, what I've done with my life that people would look up to. And I don't know if that would necessarily be true for my siblings, although like some of the things that they have done, I'm obviously super proud of them. They're my siblings, and just to be able to get past some bad choices that were made earlier in life and to come through the other side.
But if you put them in
So
a sitcom, people
yes,
would judge them differently than how they judge you.
yes. So and I've only been a parent for 3 years, so this is difficult for me. And you were raised with, we used to always joke with Catholic guilt.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
that's the thing. So as a parent, and I can't honestly, I can't think of anything where your kids effed up where you wouldn't be proud of them. I mean, I'm sure there were things where you were like, why were you being silly? But like when I look at guilt, I don't believe in guilt. I don't, and don't get me wrong, if you do something on purpose, purposely mean, purposely hurtful, like yeah, you should have guilt for that. But if something just happens, like you're doing your best and something happens, why would you feel guilty for that? So as a parent, like if your kids mess up, like to take on the guilt of I did something wrong because they did that. Does that make sense? Like what I'm trying to say? Like I don't understand it, but it's definitely a thing.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting query because I think sometimes parents should feel guilt.
Okay. Okay.
Right? Like like sometimes you do something wrong
Mm-hmm.
and you should feel guilty. You effed up. Now, not always. Not
Mm-hmm.
always, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so
So
I totally
you
understand what you're talking about.
when your kids mess up, you feel guilty for them, or you feel guilty because you did something wrong. Because
I
that's what.
me personally, like it's different, but I'm saying I can see why some parents would feel guilty because of the choices their kids have made, because
Okay.
they're the ones who made the kiddo or screwed up with the kiddo to have them make those choices,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of sucks.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think. I guess I could I guess I could see that like if the kid is really screwed up. But like really so
Well, I don't want to
as
hijack your thoughts here, but I'll give you
no, that was
examples later on.
that's
So
what I was really laying out. That was kind of where I stopped because we had to have we were having conversations even though this wasn't one of our children. We're very thankful. It was someone very close to the family and someone who
sure.
Gina helped raise. And she had made comments like where like she was like, I should have done this, I should have done that. And I'm like, this is a grown person. Like you did everything you could being the
Hmm.
favorite aunt.
Yeah.
And like you don't get to have guilt for that stuff, is
You're right.
what I was
You
saying
don't
to
get to
her.
take on their decisions. Now,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it is the case. So here's one of the
Would love to hear it.
situations that I was thinking of where I was like, "Oh my gosh, I wondered it at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now it's been long enough that like I could probably have a conversation with him.
Mm-hmm.
I probably won't because I don't think it matters."
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we've talked before, like we don't like to argue with people. And I've also gotten to the point where if I'm, so this is a huge thing for me and for my family. And you know this because you've been around me a whole long time, right? But I am innately curious,
Mm-hmm.
especially about things I don't understand, like guilt, right? Or
Yeah.
different feelings of remorse.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm so literal with so many things, I don't understand that. I like to query people about their feelings. And what I have
Mm-hmm.
learned over time is that my curiosity should not trump empathy.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. So, like, I
Mm-hmm.
think about the fact, like, okay, if I were in that person's position, and I know for listeners, I know for most of you, this happens to you naturally. Okay. So, for what I'm about to say, you're going to be like, you literally go through that process. Yeah. So, like, I think to myself, is what I'm about to ask going to affect this person in a negative way that I don't want them to feel or that I anticipate?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so a lot of you are like, I always think about how other people feel. Right. So because I don't have those feelings, I don't think about that. Like it has to be a conscious
Yeah,
choice.
that makes
Like I have
sense.
to, right. And growing up, I wasn't that way. Right. like I would just ask people stuff. And one of the big like aha moments for me was when one of my daughters came home from school and she had some classmates. They were twin classmates, and
Mm-hmm.
their brother, who was maybe 19, had died,
Mm-hmm.
right? So super sad, great kiddo. He dies. And my daughter got talked to, not like in a bad way, but like they talked to us about it, but she kept asking the girls, they're like, how does that feel that your brother died? Like, what are you going through right now with him dying? And they're
Mm-hmm.
like, what do you mean? You know, and she's like, well, because he died and like he's kind of gone forever. And you know, we're like you're never gonna see him. Like, does that really hurt? Does it burn? Does it make you cry all the time? And this is like, you know, a week after it happened,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'm like, oh, honey, you don't ask that, but I really wanted to know. And I'm like, yeah, that's not good. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
like you can't ask people questions like that. And she's like, why? Right? Like again, the same
Mm-hmm.
idea. Like she didn't have that
Mm-hmm.
comprehension. She was too little. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have that excuse. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm older. I should be able to, if nothing else, think logically about the feelings I'm going to cause.
Yeah.
Short way of saying, one of my buddies, one of his kiddos killed themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And he was super autistic. I shouldn't say
Mm-hmm.
super autistic. I don't know how you measure super autistic, right? I got along with the kiddo. The kiddo and I had discussions. He did
Mm-hmm.
great in school, but he was
Mm-hmm.
definitely on the spectrum. You with
Mm-hmm.
me?
Mm-hmm.
Like there were things, you know, like those of you who had kiddos with autism, you know what I'm talking about. Like you can
Mm-hmm.
tell. And this kiddo did. And you know, he got up one night, shot himself, and dad had lots of guns in the house. And like you know, the dad had a really rough time, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
right? But one of the things he said to me at one point, again, I'm friends, I was friends with his son, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it was, you know, I'd worked with all of his kiddos. I'd been friends
Mm-hmm.
with him forever and ever. So, you know, it was kind of like I definitely was a sounding board every once in a while,
Yeah.
right? And like he was like, yeah, he goes, I didn't know this, but did you know kiddos with autism are like, and the percentage was stupid, but they're at like a super big risk for suicide. And
Did
I
not
was
know
like,
that.
I'm like, I don't know if I knew that. Like now
Mm-hmm.
I know that. So at the
Yeah.
time, I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I knew that or not. And they're like, yeah, I wonder if I would have kind of done things differently if I had known that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one where I'm like, he's feeling guilt because his kiddo had autism,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he, I think at the time, he didn't say that he was feeling guilt. That was the vibe I was getting,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm like, he's feeling guilty because he's wondering if he screwed up and he should have been like understanding that, hey, your kiddo is at a way higher risk
Mm-hmm.
because of this. Like he's not processing things the same way. What are you doing to like make sure that you're taking care of that so that it doesn't happen? Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he was feeling really guilty. And I'm like, yeah, maybe you should. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. Like, I don't go through those feelings all the time, but I'm like, you know, like if your kiddo had deformed legs and was at risk of tripping all the time, you would probably like research that and figure out how to stop him from tripping.
Yes. That I would say that's way I would say that's slightly different because there were definitely mistakes that he had made, and if he was guilty of, I mean, you don't know where his guilt comes from. Like he might have been
Right.
guilty that the son did it, or the reason behind, if there was a way to know like
Yeah.
what would have pushed him there. So yeah,
Right.
I can understand. I can definitely understand that.
And I think that's where people feel guilty, right? Like when
Mm-hmm.
they do have, like I said, because they have a reason to feel guilty,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Yeah.
if he feels like he didn't do what he was supposed to be doing,
Yes.
then he feels guilty, and yeah, you probably should, right? Like if
Mm-hmm.
you feel like you inadvertently caused that, that should cause feelings of guilt.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I think parental guilt sometimes is true. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not saying necessarily like he should feel guilty, but like maybe,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I'm gonna screw up this story, but it's haunted me like my entire life. It's haunted me, right?
Okay.
I don't think I think it was one of my mom's nieces or nephews, some kind of a family member, right? And she talked about how their siblings died because they got scalded to death in a bathtub. Because at the time they were taking a bath, the parents left them there and it got turned on hot.
Mm-hmm.
And and she was talking about, like, she was explaining to me why the kiddos were messed up. And she's
Yeah.
like, because they were trying to save them and they couldn't pull them out of the tub.
Yeah.
And so that like messed up their brains, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she told me that when I was younger, when I was like, why are these family members screwed up?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Yeah.
I'm like, those parents should feel guilty.
Yeah.
Like they done
Yeah.
screwed up and they
Mm-hmm.
screwed up a whole group of kiddos. And, and the story might not even be real anymore, right? Like my mind, we just
Mm-hmm.
talked about this recently with some kiddos. Like your mind messes things up and it fabricates things and it fills in gaps. So,
Mm-hmm.
but again, that's not something that I'm so curious about that I'm going to go ask my mom to relive those traumatic memories
Yeah.
to tell me about it. Like if she's forgotten that, cool.
Yeah,
Right. Like
exactly.
just like my buddy, like if he's put that behind him, I'm not going to bring that up
Mm-hmm.
and make him re-feel all those feelings
Mm-hmm.
just to satisfy my curiosity
Yeah.
of how
I
long
was like,
that guilt
oh,
lasts.
I'm wondering about this.
Hey, I was wondering, how
Mm-hmm.
guilty do you still feel about your
Mm-hmm.
kiddo? Like, that's a bad thing
Mm-hmm.
to do, people. I've learned that lesson. You don't do stuff
Yeah.
like that,
Yeah.
right? And if he's listening to this, sorry, I'm not meaning to bring up that. We
Mm-hmm.
should put there a
Thank you for
trigger warning
listening.
on this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So definitely this episode is going to have to go out, people, with a trigger warning. I'll put it
Mm-hmm.
on the tweet, trigger warning. What?
And then you
Death,
can just tag them.
suicide, parental guilt. And then I'll tag everybody I know. So,
There you go. Actually, it's funny. It's kind of circled around to this because let me see.
oh my gosh.
So
Wait,
okay, go
before you
ahead.
circle around.
Mm-hmm.
So this is so totally not death related, still parental
Okay.
guilt, right?
Excellent.
And this like clicked in my brain recently. And I was like, I don't think this is the same. But then I'm like, maybe it is the same. And I'm so confused. I'm so confused, right?
Awesome.
So you listeners, we are really big on you can change things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can affect the universe if you're focusing and you're thinking, okay? Early on in my years of coaching, okay, I had a kiddo who was hurt his shoulder, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I would not change anything I did, which is why, like, a lot of times I don't feel guilt about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I only would wonder about guilt as if I think if you were going to change what you did, right?
Yeah.
So the kiddo had a hurt shoulder. He had been wrestling. He felt better. I put him in some wrestling matches and it still hurt. Not
Mm-hmm.
bad, right? But like his dad, like flew off the handle and was like pissed and was like starting to yell at me. And I was like, listen, you got to yell at me like sometime in private, like,
Mm-hmm.
not here. And I like had a meeting with him and he's like, you shouldn't have put him out there. He's injured. I'm like, listen, he's been fine. He was checked. He was good. He's not hurt that bad. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. Like you think that. And he was like, I hope one day that your kid gets hurt and that a coach does that to them and puts them out there and that feeling, blah, blah. And I was like, rude. Like,
Uh-huh.
me, like, I'm just like,
Yeah.
rude. That's weird. That's a weird thing to put your energy towards. You
Mm-hmm.
want my kid who you don't even know to
Yeah.
get hurt. Like, I'm like, weird. Right. And the AD was like, that's not appropriate. Like, that's just rude.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So fast forward 20 years, right? And my kiddo got hurt
Mhm.
because a coach put him in there in a situation knowing that the kiddo could get hurt
Yeah.
and then allowed them to keep wrestling hurt. And I was the coach.
Mhm.
So I'm like, not only did a coach do that to me and my kid, it was me doing the thing. So I'm like, I clearly would make the same decision again. And it wouldn't matter if it was my kid or your kid. I did it to my own kid.
Yeah.
And like, it's funny because like people close to me like try to make me feel guilty about that. And I'm like, I don't think I have the gene for that kind of guilt. Because they're
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, you allowed your daughter to get hurt, by putting the team before her health and safety. I'm like, you could get hurt walking down the street. I'm like,
Mhm.
sometimes you get hurt, sometimes shit happens, and that sucks.
Mhm.
And it sucks. It was my daughter, and that hurts. But I would make the same choice again. Like if we
Yeah.
were wrestling again, I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to make that choice.
Yeah.
Right. And
Well, I
she
got
would probably assume I would make that choice.
should expect it out of you.
Yeah.
Well, like I always tell the boys, like the more fun you're having, the higher your chances of getting hurt are. And the more fun, the worse you can get hurt. Like, but it's just a
Yes.
trade-off. Like if you're riding your bike and you're jumping jumps and you fall off and you hurt yourself, like, okay, cool. You get back up and you keep on doing it again. But look how much fun you were having. So
Right.
it's funny. I always point that out, especially when they're hurt. Like, okay, were you having fun before that? Like,
Yeah.
well, this is about the most hurt that you should get for that amount of fun.
That is exactly right.
So that's funny. And she was, I imagine she was having an amazing time, and she would have done what she could do to help the team, anyways.
Yes. I mean, she was a leader extraordinaire, so that's what you would expect.
Hmm.
So, yeah. So, anyway, but that was something where people felt guilty about it. And in retrospect, I'm like, oh, what he feels guilty about is himself making those decisions,
Hmm.
right? Like, I don't have any knowledge of that. Like, he was like, you're the adult, you're supposed to know how hurt he is. I'm like, if your kiddo tells me he's good,
Hmm.
I believe the kiddo. I don't think he's lying to me. If
Yeah.
you think he's lying, then you should have told me he's lying and that he's hurt.
Hmm.
I go,
Yeah.
you're the one who dropped the ball. Don't be
Yeah.
mad at me. I go, and if he had like dominated, you wouldn't be crying to me. So
Hmm.
I go, you should go cry somewhere else.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Especially a high school kid at that age and
Yeah.
what they would want to do. Like, of course. Like
Yeah, for sure.
a lot of kids peak at that age. So
I was just thinking that recently. I'm like, oh man, I'm looking at some of my kiddos. I'm like, oh, you've had the best years of your life. Like they're going by right now. I don't think you're appreciating how good this is because the rest of your life is going to be shit. So sorry about that.
That does happen. That does
It
happen.
does. It does.
Mhm.
You got to live your life right.
And
Right.
that's why the Bruce Springsteen Glory Days is such an amazing song.
I was literally thinking that song right there
Mhm.
with you. Right there with you. So yeah, you were circling back. I'm sorry. I totally sidetracked you. Totally derailed you.
I was gonna circle back. I don't think I'm going to. I don't know if it's
So
appropriate.
so what's the message here? I think the message is my parental friends. So a lot of our listeners are
Hmm.
parents. Some of you have had your kid go through this. And I think here's the deal. There comes a time when you as a parent are no longer responsible for them or their actions.
Hmm.
Like you've raised them, hopefully, the best you could raise them at the
Hmm.
time you were doing the raising with the data you had, right? And if you weren't, if you knew something and you did it wrong purposely, then you're an a-hole and you should feel guilty,
Hmm.
right? Like
Yep.
if you were using your kid as a sex slave, like that's bad. You know it's
Hmm.
wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. Okay? Like that's
Hmm.
just wrong. But most of us work hard to be good parents. And so
Hmm.
if you using the data you knew, like that guy, like I'm like, man, I don't know if you should feel guilty. You didn't know that fact.
Hmm.
And maybe you should have researched that fact more. I don't know if you should have or not, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not me, but I don't think you should feel guilty because you did the best you had with the knowledge you had. And
Hmm.
that doesn't change the fact that you feel guilty, but you got to continuously work at putting that guilt away because if your
Yeah.
kiddo makes a bad choice, that's not on you.
Mm-hmm.
right? That's not
Yeah.
on you.
No,
Like,
it's a great takeaway. And you can
yeah.
see, I mean, even like you can when kids are in high school, like, obviously when they're in the home and everything,
Mhm.
you can see their friends, you can help them. Sometimes people just get mixed up with people who aren't great friends, who aren't great for them, who have different visions of what you would want for your child. And sometimes you can affect that and sometimes you can't. But you're exactly right. There comes a point where you don't really have any control over that. Like you may be seeing them, just here and there.
Like my mom, I truly believe if I went on a murderous rampage,
Hmm.
I believe my mom would feel horrible and feel guilty, right?
Hmm.
But she knows there's literally nothing she could have done raising me that would change me from that outcome,
Yeah.
right? Like I am who I am.
Hmm.
And her raising me wasn't what caused that. That was my
Hmm.
brain that caused that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You get what I mean?
Hmm. Well,
Now,
people
if
have
I did
different
that when I was
paths.
7, if I did
Yeah.
that when I was 7, that's on her. That's
Yep.
her fault, right?
Hmm.
But as old as I am now,
Yep.
that's not on her. She has no effect of anything I'm going through right
Hmm.
now, besides being a loving, supportive mother.
Hmm.
So she doesn't get to own that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is, where did I see that once? Was it a book? Was it a movie? I'm trying to remember. Maybe you'll remember it, but it was something where somebody was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that I did this." And they're like, "You don't get to take that away. That's
Yeah.
my pain. It's my guilt. It's my decisions. You don't
Hmm.
get to own any part of that. Just like you don't get to own my happiness or whatever.
Hmm.
That's mine. I made the decisions. I did the thing. You
Yeah.
don't get that. That's
Hmm.
that's my personal stuff,
Yeah.
right?" And I forget what movie or book it was. I'm gonna
That
have to
doesn't
think
sound
about it.
familiar. Yeah.
But I remember thinking like, yeah, that's my stuff.
Hmm.
You're taking that away from me when you try to absorb it. And you say it's my fault. Like my mom said, that's my fault. I feel guilty. You're saying that I didn't have a choice in what I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not right. I had the choice.
Hmm.
It's my decision. You don't get to take that away from me. You don't get to take my power.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Gina didn't like that's not because of her. That kiddo
Hmm.
made that choice. And that kiddo would still be making that choice if things hadn't gone badly. It's like drunk
Hmm.
drivers.
Hmm.
Like you didn't make them drink. You raised them the best you had. And yeah, they turned that way.
Hmm.
Hey, weird. It's genetic. It's the whole freaking family.
Hmm.
Your best bet is trying to figure out how to handle addiction.
Yeah.
And you couldn't have done that at that age.
Hmm.
You're trying to figure your own life out.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Being real, people. Being real.
Yeah. And
So,
sometimes people just have to go through some stuff. Like they signed up for that. We've talked about our friends who had children at a really young age. They had to go through that at a young age, and that
yes.
makes your 20s and your 30s more difficult than somebody who's in college or just doing whatever, going to a trade and being single for a long time,
Hmm.
then starting a life, having kids and things like that when you're more
Well, and
established.
and I get people a lot who are having this guilt, right?
Hmm.
Like I deal with kiddos a lot. So I deal with parents who have guilt. And like there was one recently, like within a couple of years, like I'm talking to them and they're on like their last kid. And they're like, we found out our kid is like really struggling. Like we found out that he's like learning disabled. I'm like, for sure, yeah. And they're like, but we
Hmm.
realized he has the same problem as his like 5 brothers. And how bad did we screw up the 5 brothers? We just thought they were lazy and doing this and this. And I was like, listen, you don't get to have that.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, you can punish yourself if you want, but you made the decision with the knowledge you had. Now you have new knowledge. You can make new
Hmm.
decisions for this kiddo and make his life better. But you shouldn't be feeling guilty for the decisions. You didn't have the data to make the
Yeah.
decision. So,
Hmm.
anyway, people, we're going to run out of
Yes.
time. Thank you if you stayed with us. It was a super rough, tough episodes. I normally look
Yes.
at my phone and I forget. Oh my gosh.
I
My phone has
appreciate
stuff
the
on it.
input, Bob.
Yeah, I'm
Appreciate
super
it.
happy. And people, I hope you loved the episode. And you know what? Come back next time. We'll probably talk more. So this is Ballbuster signing off.
Tilt the Dragon Chair. Love you all.